From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
The Democratic Party has a new presumptive nominee for president.
I know Donald Trump's type.
The party has quickly rallied behind Vice President Kamala Harris after President Biden bowed to weeks of pressure to drop out of the race. The switch means former President Trump is now the oldest person ever to run for the nation's highest office. How will the Trump campaign adjust? And does Harris have enough runway before the November election to pull off a historic victory? This week on Newsmakers, we break it all down with a political roundtable. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi, and we welcome back to the program for this political roundtable Cara Cromwell. She is a political strategist, and 12 News political analyst Joe Fleming. Welcome back to the program. It's good to have all of you here.
Thank you.
Look, every day we live history, right? But for the past week or so, it feels more of a reality that that's happening and truer than ever. So Ted, this doesn't only completely upend, completely change the presidential race, but it has a huge impact on Democratic candidates everywhere, right?
Yeah, I've been saying, Tim, I think people need to not just think about this on the basic question of can Harris win the White House in November? Can she defeat Donald Trump? You had in the final weeks there of Joe Biden's candidacy an absolutely demoralized Democratic Party. I mean, as you saw the polls starting to sink, you saw the divide in the party. That has shifted really overnight. You see there's energy among Democrats. You see their polling improving. So even if Harris were to lose maybe a close race come November, just giving Democrats a reason to fight, I think, is beneficial to them up and down the ballot. And then, of course, if you have Senate candidates and House candidates who can run stronger than the presidential ticket, well, if Harris is, losing by 2 points, let's say, and they can run ahead of her, they might be able to win. Whereas if Biden was losing a swing state by 10 points, they're probably getting crushed.
Are you surprised, Cara, at how quickly the party coalesced behind Kamala Harris, and there was really no one who said, wait a minute, I want to be the nominee too?
Yes, if you'd asked me a day earlier, I would have thought there would have been a little bit more of a fight. I was shocked at how everybody jumped almost in the same instant to say, I'm with her. And it's not typical of Democrats, who we've joked before that they tend to eat their own, right? You might have an incumbent. We've seen it in Rhode Island, where Governor Raimondo, kind of had some spirited primaries. That shouldn't happen to an incumbent.
I think the Democrats realized it was getting really bad with Joe Biden, and that after he stepped out, if they didn't come together very fast, it was going to be a very long election season. And they were smart. One of the few times they all went together and they supported the vice president. So she's been building momentum since last Sunday. She's raised a lot of money, a lot of new donors, and it's all because the Democrats came together quickly. If they did not, I think Donald Trump would have been in a lot better position than he is today, because the Democrats would have been fighting with each other.
Yeah, you say that the Democrats realized they had a problem with Joe Biden, but last week we still had Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Senator Bernie Sanders, full-throated support for Joe Biden. Looking back at that, it's kind of shocking.
It is, and I think, there was one poll this week had 90% of Americans in agreement that Joe Biden made the right decision to step out. That's what felt a little strange. And some Democrats I was talking to privately said, we know we can't tell Americans all through the fall that we think Joe Biden's the same as ever, that he can definitely do this job for 4 more years. I mean, it does feel like some of the Democrats who were saying he could still do this to them. I mean, we saw his speech. He's diminished. That's why he's had to take this unprecedented step. And so I think that's why you saw in Rhode Island, U.S. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse just refused to say that it might be okay to leave Biden on the ticket, even though he wouldn't quite tell him to drop out. And when White House met with reporters, we were all on a Zoom with him on Monday. I said to him, why did you give those quotes that were inevitably damaging to Biden when he might have stayed in the ticket? He said, because facts matter, and we couldn't pretend that debate hadn't happened.
What does the Trump campaign do now, Cara?
Oof. This really is the checkerboard going over and a completely new game. Mainly, in my view, because it could potentially bring out a group of voters that they weren't counting on showing up, which is kind of the under 30 crowd. I think has a much more interest in a Harris presidency than they would have in coming out for Biden. I'm not giving any advice to the Trump campaign, but they need to figure out how to pull out their own younger voters and how to sound a little less, I'll just say, old and cranky. I mean, that MAGA message is meant for the 65 and over crowd, which is great because they're the most reliable voters to turn out. But they're going to have to appeal to a wider swath.
But aren't there two huge chapters of the Trump playbook that are still in play here? I call it the problem for Harris are the two I's, inflation and immigration. Right, Joe? I mean, he can still lean into that with Harris.
If I was Donald Trump, I would do that. Inflation's going down, but a lot of people haven't felt it yet. But the immigration is an area where I think he could really make inroads against Harris. The president put her in charge of immigration back 3.5 years ago, and basically things got worse before they got better. So I think there's an area you can go at. The question is, can Donald Trump stay on message and get his message out there, or is Donald Trump going to revert back to attacking and going to the low road instead of the high road?
I think of it a little like, it looked like the Trump team, as of a week ago, could just let Biden lose. And when, Biden was going to lose, and they just had to coast along, not make any big mistakes.
He could go to Mar-a-Lago, play golf.
Some of his supporters were saying, like, please don't talk, Donald Trump. We're going to win this. Like, don't make any bad headlines for us with your statements. Now they have to win. They have to proactively win, I think. I do think that has shifted. You see it in the polling. You just see it in the momentum. You see it. In fact, you have, Joe Biden could not make a case against Donald Trump effectively anymore, let alone campaign for himself. Harris doesn't have that problem. She has plenty of vulnerabilities. I think right now what you're going to see is this fight to define her in the eyes of Americans who don't have a strong feeling about her. She's every Democrat, every second word out of a Democrat's mouth now is prosecutor. That's how they want everyone to think of Kamala Harris. But for Trump's people, they're going to mention her time in charge of the border. They're going to mention that she was the #2 for an administration that has a lot of vulnerabilities. Inflation, yes. The Afghanistan pullout was very damaging to Joe Biden, et cetera. So, both sides need to work very quickly and see who can get the advantage on defining her, I think.
I honestly think that, at this stage, and I'm going to call it a process, not a race, because a race makes it sound like you can get ahead and then actually win, when that's not how an election works, right? It's a process that doesn't really begin until the nominees are both set and people begin to vote. In this process, I think right now there are people who've made up their mind that they're voting for Trump, and that's not going to change. And then there are people who've made up their mind that they're voting for anyone but Trump, and I think that's not going to change. So that piece in the middle, I think, is all about inspiring people to show up. Because there were a whole bunch of people who maybe didn't love Trump, but they couldn't get off their couch to vote for, Joe Biden. Maybe this inspires them to do that. And I think that's what the whole game is about. I'm not even sure if it comes down to like key issues, immigration, inflation. I think it's just about, where we want to be as a country.
I agree. I think we're talking about maybe 10% of the voters at the most. The other 90% have pretty much decided. And the question is, can she get voters to come out? I know a lot of people said to me, I can't vote for Trump, but I can't vote for Biden either. So I'm just not voting for president. Those same people are now saying to me, I'm voting. And that's what she has to do, motivate people. I noticed in polling, the younger voters now, where Donald Trump was leading Joe Biden, she's now winning by like about 5 points. With Hispanics, where Trump was up, Biden was down like 7 or 8 points, she's only down by 2 points. So things are starting to move her way. The question is, can she keep the momentum going? She has it. She's got the former president endorsed her this morning, last night. Can this keep on going right through the convention and get a big convention bump to give her the lead, especially in the swing states?
And we have a snapshot, and we're going to go to break now, but we have a snapshot on that. Polls are starting to come in. I want to talk about that when we come back from the break. And before we go, I just want to point out that Ted Nesi had picked the worst week to take a vacation. He shouldn't even be here right now, but that's how much he values you, the Newsmakers viewer.
I'm always here for you folks.
He is here on a big week of news. All right, stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers.
I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
President Joe Biden addressing the nation on Wednesday night. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is Ted Nesi, a political roundtable with Joe Fleming and Cara Cromwell. To the table briefly here. What's Joe Biden's legacy? Maybe it's too early to tell.
I think we'll know in November. I think the polls were flashing red for years now that voters did not want him to run again. They thought he was too old. Many Democrats privately agreed, but felt they couldn't say that in public about sitting president they thought was going to run. And if history looks back and decides he let his as he says, his personal ambition to cloud his judgment and his advisors and bring Trump back into office because he didn't give his party a real chance, I think it's going to look very different. If Harris somehow pulls this off, I think history will probably be kinder. But I just think, yes, there's all sorts of other things Biden defenders can point to that, his work on Ukraine and with NATO and the strengthening of the economy. But I do think it's going to be hard for history to overlook what his decisions meant for Donald Trump's potential return.
I think this is his legacy no matter what. And I think history will be kind to him. I think it's very much like President Johnson, who, stepped back at a time where he didn't think he'd be the most effective leader. So I think that, he made the right decision, obviously.
Let's go to our veteran pollster here, Joe Fleming. The polls are starting to come in.
Yes, they are.
Joe, New York Times, Siena College came out with a national poll. Trump is still leading there, but only by like a point. I think it was 48 to 47%. That is 6 points better than the same poll when Biden was in the race.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. The polls are now tightening up quite a bit. And again, keep in mind, this isn't so much a national election. It's 50 states that are voting. And you got to get the 270 electoral votes from those states. We got to look more at the individual states. For example, places like New Hampshire, Minnesota, New Mexico, they were starting to swing away from the Democrats to the point where I saw Virginia even, Biden was losing. However, now I saw a poll today for New Hampshire. Harris is up by 6. And now it's becoming more of a blue state than it was before. So it's starting to turn. Michigan, I've seen 3 polls. She was up by 2, she was tied, she was down by 2. Biden was down by like 6 or 7 in those states. So she's closing that gap. I would say Trump's still the favorite, but she's making momentum. Again, as I said before, can she keep the momentum going to close that gap?
Ted, you and I talk about this all the time off the show. I dismiss national polling, right, because of just what Joe said, that tell me the polls in the swing states defend it.
Well, I think all polling, you cannot. It's not a prediction, and it's got a margin of error.
Sure.
You can't look as closely at she's at 48 and he's at 46 or something like that. You just say, all right, that tells you there's a tight race going on here, and both sides have reason to fight. Whereas when the polls are starting to show Biden, as Joe said, slipping into the closing close to a double-digit gap in some of these swing states, that even in a national poll, down 6 points nationally, a Democrat's not going to win the White House losing the national vote, because just if you think about the country, it's not a different set of candidates in the swing states. It's the same mood music of the election, even if those people are getting spoken to more. So if you're losing the country by 6, 7 points or something like that, the odds that, but in Michigan, they actually love you, that's just not really how politics works. And so I think you got to look at it as a sense of where things are going. This is a tight and competitive race where I still think, I agree, Trump for now is a narrow edge, though I do think he may come to regret choosing J.D. Vance.
Why?
I just think, he has a negative favorability rating already. That's unusual for a VP pick. And he's obviously, as we've seen this week, said a lot of incendiary things that are now coming back to haunt them in a way that I don't think, Marco Rubio, if he'd been picked, those kind of quotes would be circulating.
J.D. Vance?
Yeah, I think they didn't vet him particularly well. And I think when you bring Jennifer Aniston into a race, when she's angry at you, I think that's,
Didn't he have buyer's remorse with Pence? I seem to remember this early on.
On January 6th, he did.
I think Pence had buyer's remorse as well, for the record.
Well, since we're talking about vice president, sorry, or do you want to weigh in,
I was going to
JD?
say, in most cases, a vice president doesn't make a big difference.
Right.
They're voting on the president. So is it going to be Harris or Trump? The vice president's secondary in most cases.
Unless they weigh down the campaign.
You don't want them to be a net negative. You want them to be neutral, and hey, if they can be a positive in certain places, great.
I think sometimes they're a good balance. I remember with Obama, Biden was such a good pick because of his foreign policy experience. And so if there's a balancing, I think it matters a little bit, but it should definitely not be a negative.
What about on the other, the other side? There's been talk. CBS News put out a list of potential VP candidates. and they reported that are being vetted right now. Former Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo is on that list. She's obviously Commerce Secretary right now. Ted, is Raimondo a realistic possibility here? Two women on a ticket?
Well, look, there's over 300 million people in America. She's about one of a dozen being vetted, so she's a better chance than the vast majority of us.
Okay,
you're not on the list yet.
No, I am not.
But, it's very hard for me to imagine Gina Raimondo, obviously not coming from a swing state. She's actually not well known nationally. We're all very familiar with her in southern New England, and she's got a good reputation in Washington. I do think it's a testament to how she has succeeded as Commerce Secretary and made a good name for herself. But I tend to think it's going to wind up being one of these swing state governors or senators we're hearing about more than anything else.
Who's on top of your list?
Top of my list is Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, due to the fact it's going to be a very close election there. And if he could deliver 1 or 2 points, that could be enough to put her over the top. So, I mean, I think he would be one. Senator Kelly from Arizona, another swing state. Governor Roy Cooper from North Carolina. Those are the top 3, I believe. But again, we've seen some picks that you don't expect coming. For example, John McCain picking Sarah Palin. No one saw that coming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they could be looking at other people. They tell you they're vetting these people, but there could be somebody else in the background they think could help even more. But those are the 3, I think. All
right. Cara, do you have a prediction at all?
I mean, I actually really like in the horse race kind of way of liking, Mark Kelly as well. I think Arizona. Also, just the profile, Gabby Giffords, the gun issue is really important to younger voters.
He's the husband of Gabby.
I'm sorry, the husband of Gabby Giffords, who was the member of Congress who was shot in Tucson at an event in 2011. And he subsequently retired as an astronaut and then ran for Congress or the Senate.
I have a question, but we have to go to break. I know we're at break right now, but just real quick,
folks.
And I guess it's a question for you, Ted. One thing I thought about is, so Harris adopted the Biden campaign. Biden was doing very few events. Now you have a candidate that needs to do Obama-level 3 states a day type of events. Are they ready for that?
Oh, I think so. I mean, the staff isn't 82, just the candidate was, or 81, or whatever Biden is right now, right? I mean, and don't forget, too, going back to Trump, you said it in the open, Tim, Trump's now the oldest candidate who's ever run for president. Yeah. He doesn't do a ton of events. Now, he makes so much news when he has an event because he gives a long speech, et cetera, that I think sometimes people forget, but he'll sometimes go days without having one. And Harris, I mean, part of what I think Democrats are excited about is that she does have the energy to, I mean, people assume that she can go to multiple states a day, do big rallies, do another event, also just doing interviews. Biden didn't like to do interviews anymore. Right. Think about that. A sitting president can get an interview on any network at any time, go on 60 Minutes whenever you want. Biden didn't want to, and his team clearly didn't want to because he's so diminished. Harris, now, I don't know if she wants to either.
I don't know that she will do a lot of interviews.
Or she can certainly do a friendly interview. Biden wasn't even good on like a late night show anymore.
Right.
She can go on Jimmy Fallon and make some jokes and try to push up the numbers Cara was talking about.
All right, we do have to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to zoom back into Rhode Island. We're going to break down a UNH poll that takes a look at Governor Dan McKee. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside Ted Nesi, Political Roundtable with Joe Fleming and Cara Cromwell. We're going to come back to Rhode Island now and talk about a UNH poll. We talked about it on the show last week, actually, Ted. 598 Rhode Island registered voters found only 29% approve of the job that Governor Dan McKee is doing. A really high disapproval number there, 65%, and then 6% weren't sure. I want to get everybody's take on these numbers and what's driving it. Joe?
Well, to me, I think the biggest problem for the governor is not the overall number, but the number among Democrats. Only 42% give him a favorable job rating.
Can you tell me how that might compare to previous polls, not to put you on the spot?
In previous polls I've done in the past, governors or Democrats, among Democrats, have a lot higher number. They're like at least, even if they're doing bad, they get like 60% of the Democratic vote.
Above 50.
Above 50, absolutely. Independents, Republicans, they don't. But at 42%, that says to me he's ripe for a primary 2 years from now if somebody wants to go after him, and obviously there's people lining up to go after the governor. He needs to improve that Democratic number because, as we know, this is a very heavily Democratic state. And if this number stays low, they're going to be coming from all over to go after the governor. Again, a multi-candidate race would help the governor.
Sure.
But if it's just a one-on-one, it's going to hurt him. And again, part of it is the bridge, I would think, which everyone's talking about. But again, he has to get the Democratic number up over 50, 60%.
Well, as you said, it's 2 years, and
Right.
so he has a lot
Long
of time to do that. Cara, is it about the bridge? Is it that simple?
I think a lot of it's about the bridge. I think a lot of it is about people talking about the bridge too, right? Having, I live
Darn
on
media.
that side of the darn media. I live on that side of the bridge, and there certainly have been days where it's been gruesomely challenging, and for people who commute every day, it's terrible. So I would imagine that number for the, kind of the East Bay crowd being really low if they're blaming him about the bridge. But I think there's also there's a lot of talk about it. It is the topic of conversation, and it's been challenging for them. So yeah, it's the bridge, and it's then the talking about the bridge.
I also have to contrast it with the two governors we've been talking about, Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania and Governor Wes Moore down in Maryland. They've both faced bridge crises recently, both Democrats, and the crises have actually strengthened them. Not in both cases, the bridge is shut down for different reasons, obviously. But I don't think people blamed Dan McKee for maybe to some extent, why were the inspections bad or whatever. I think it's people have been frustrated with the response. It's not, they know many governors share the blame for the bridge not being inspected, but how has the administration handled it? Not getting any bids, I think, was very damaging, suggesting that they still don't have their arms around the problem.
Was this poll in the field before or after the bid news?
After.
Okay.
But I think from moment one on this bridge, it was about the failures of state government, whether or not that was Dan McKee or another governor. So the governor takes the blame for that, even if it wasn't, on his watch.
I agree.
All right. I think we have time for this. Good. Alex, pull up the next poll here on biggest concern for Rhode Islanders and housing. Top the list. I mean, I guess I have a little surprise in my voice, though I shouldn't. We have a housing crisis here, 16%, followed by infrastructure. That is bridge. Jobs in the economy, 13%, and then corrupt/incompetent government at 11%.
Well, on housing, I'd relate it again to this question of what are you doing about it, right? I don't think people can say Governor Dan McKee is the reason Rhode Island didn't build housing starting in the 90s.
Right.
But people have been hearing now for a couple of years, constant talk, we're working on the housing crisis, money's going into housing crisis, and yet what's on the cover of the Journal this week? Almost the median home in Rhode Island is now almost $500,000. It's a huge problem. It's not easy to solve, but right now they're without a permanent housing secretary because Stephen Pryor stepped down. And I do still wonder, even with all the work Chikarchi and McKee and others have done on this, the problem is so vast that for all the effort they've put into it, it might still not be nearly enough to actually affect people in their lives by making their rent lower, by having more affordable homes available for sale.
We have 10 seconds.
Okay, I was going to just say, when you look to the poll, the infrastructure and incompetent government, those two things probably go together.
Of course.
As far as the bridge.
Totally agree with you.
So it's like 25, 26%.
Actually, Ted has a full right-through on the poll if you want to see it on WPRI.com. You can also catch Newsmakers there. We'll see you next week.